right, we are going to get started. So again, today we're going to talk about a few different things, a little bit of synthesizing some of what Kalee Whipple and I have been working on with our students in middle school and high school. But first, let's have some introduction. So Paula, thank you so much. Would you mind saying a couple words of introduction?
Oh, I would love to. First of all, I want to thank you, Allie and Kalee, for having me be a part of this today. Um, I'm a licensed clinical psychologist here in Las Vegas and do a lot of work with children, teenagers, and families around managing stress and really enjoy using a certain evidence-based kind of treatment that I know that Allie's going to be talking about today with dialectical behavioral therapy. So I'm honored to be here and to share with the community today. So thank you for having me.
We're so happy to partner with you always. Before we started, Kalee, Paula, and I were having a, psychologist convo, and it's really nice to be able to connect with other people doing the work. Kalee Whipple is our counselor, and would you like to say a few words of introduction, Kalee?
Yes. Hello. Grateful for all of you that are participating, and thank you, Paula, again for coming. My name is Kalee. I'm in my 4th year here at Meadows, but my 2nd year as a counselor, working with Allie. We do all divisions, but I'm mostly in the middle school. But grateful to be here and grateful for all of you caregivers for being here.
Yeah. So again, just to say a couple of things, if we will hopefully have time for some questions at the end, if you can put them in the Q&A. We are mostly going to be going over some of the content that we have been sharing with the 7th through 12th graders, as well as some of the elementary students in a different way, where we've talked about coping and managing stress. We will enter into some of the more heavy content about suicide prevention, which can be uncomfortable, but indeed very, very important and something we can't ignore. We're also, as we've shared in our communication, we're following a Nevada state law that was passed last year, which really requires school counselors and schools to work on coping skills and teach students how to, what to do if they're worried about a friend or themselves in the realm of suicide prevention. We'll talk a little bit about some different strategies from dialectical behavioral therapy, as well as just ways to raise resilience in your young people, and ultimately just share a little bit of the steps that we take in some of the more hot crisis situations. And so again, thank you for being here. Some of this content is tough to talk about, but we believe that the 3 of us have, dedicated our professional lives to this work of raising resilience in our young people and having a school where everyone can thrive. So really, we just want to again share that it has been tough for kids. We are seeing more increases in, I'm sure Paula's practice is very busy. There's a lot of therapists in town who say, oh, I'm so busy. Stress and anxiety is definitely present in some of our families. And certainly unknowns about the virus has caused some emotional dysregulation. But at the same time, we're dedicated at the school to helping address this and normalize some of the feelings that come and go. And this is sort of the metaphor that we use with our young people in a prevention lesson. So we talk about stress being like a wave, and that some days it's easy to stay afloat. Kalee, do you want to speak a little bit more about this approach and how we talked about this with our students?
Absolutely. So both in our, suicide prevention lesson and in our advisory, we've been talking about, that we can't stop the waves, or yeah, we can't stop, or we can learn to, I need to see the slide again. But, we talk about the stressors that come into our lives that we can't control, that those may be the tests or, the weather, the pandemic, fights, conflicts, losses within our family, that, that we can't stop the waves from coming, but we can build up our coping skills. And so those were some of the examples. So, some of the biggest waves we talked about in advisory were those tests, or like 4 tests in one day, or, bunches of homework. But the thing that we talked about is that just because we get rid of the stressor, so the tests or, the conflict, that there is a stress cycle and a stress response, and it stays within our body. And we talked about building up our coping skills so that we can, attend to that stress cycle. We give them a list. We talk about, things that they can do within school, because there's times where it's like, well, I love to listen to music, or I love to go on a run. And those things are all great to have within our toolkit. But then we talked about, well, what are some of the things that we can do at school, that we can't always just go and get on FaceTime with our friend. And so, we we talk about a lot of those things that we can do. We also find it very important to talk about, adults in their life that they can talk about with. And we have them write down 3 adults that are, that they feel comfortable going to. And then remembering those 3 adults, that when they feel that dysregulation, that they are able to go and talk to those adults, that we want every kid to have somebody that they feel comfortable talking to.
What a great recap, Ms. Whipple. Thank you so much.
I kind of jumped all over the place, so you can kind of fill in where I went.
No, it's great because, again, just to share with you parents that in all grades, we have been speaking to the students and reaching out to them in various fashions, through advisory, through some lessons, as well as just keeping our doors open to help explain that stress is normal. I'm just going to go back to this slide quickly, and that considering we are, in a tough time, you're having an awareness of what's happening in your body and your mind really helps with easing some of the stress cycle and easing some of the physiological impacts of having some uncertainty, as well as having potentially other stresses in life, like a ton of work or future worry. That's one that we hear a lot in our offices.
Allie, if I could just chime in on one thing, I just wanted to add to that. These days, it is the rates of anxiety disorders and other mental health issues like depression are on the rise to the number of about 45% with people during the pandemic. And I think it's even perhaps a little bit higher with teens. So these stressors are real, they're there, and just validating them and giving the students the tools to manage them is really the key.
Yes. And so starting with some of what we teach some of the younger kids is that stress is going to take many forms, and that you can have a stressed out body. And here are some of the signs of that, because part of the key to healthy coping is not waiting too long until things are too bad and catching it early. So some of the clues we teach the younger ones is, hey, check into your body and see what's going on. We also talk about what a stressed out mind means. So a few things that we talk about here, and this is something that Paula certainly addresses a lot in her individual work with clients and families, is that when you're in a stress cycle, your thinking is going to potentially have very big negative thoughts. We talk about the word rumination, that sometimes the brain has a hard time unhooking from some of the worry thoughts. And even thinking things like, I can't learn this, no one likes me, this is too hard, as well as the concentration issues is very real for our students when they are in a stress cycle or feeling an extensive amount of worry. So again, helping kids identify when their thoughts are big and trying to soothe and work towards a more neutral place, as well as, and we'll get to this a little bit more when we get to Wise Mind, but that also teaching that these big negative thoughts are usually attached to unpleasant feelings. So that's another way to check in with yourself as a student if you are, in the stress cycle is, am I feeling grouchy? We had all of our students, we asked this question: raise your hand if in the last week you have felt extremely grouchy, down, and frustrated, and getting up and not wanting to go to school. And guess how many hands were up? Every single hand in the room, including the adults. And so again, using the wave metaphor, we are really working with the young people to understand that, hey, this is natural. This is a part of life. Stress is something that's going to come in and out, but you have the internal coping skills. We just need to tap into them and start practicing them. I will say too that as a parent, and Paula, you may want to jump in on this one. As a parent, you may be attending to or seeing some behaviors when your child is feeling stressed or having some mood issues. And this is an interesting piece because it wasn't until the 80s that the American Pediatric Association really even identified adolescent depression as a diagnosable condition. Because when you see the behaviors, yelling, grouchy, refusing to do things, those are just typical signs of adolescence in many ways. And so it's confusing. It was confounding to the health professionals for many years. And now that we have more kind of research and we're using our functional MRIs and brain scans, we're really able to have the evidence that nope, our children and adolescents are just as susceptible to some of these mental health conditions that our adults are. And that, I think, may be part of why we're kind of new in this field. Is that something, Paula, that you want to speak to? Or
I'm so glad you brought that up, Allie, because I think it's difficult for parents as well when they see these behaviors in their children. And one of the things that I think is really important is to understand that the approach is not, to judge, but just to describe and support, and kind of destigmatizing that they're experiencing difficult behaviors. And sometimes the parents are going through stress reactions too. So what I love about this evidence-based approach that you're espousing today is the underlying tenet is to be non-judgmental, to be mindful, and to be descriptive about what's going on. And that's huge for people when they don't feel like they're being judged about what they're experiencing, and that rather people are there to support and to really just give strategies to help improve how they're feeling.
Thank you so much. Exactly. Yeah. The non-judgmental piece is so key to the ability to get kind of address difficult things. And so we again, this is something we'll come back to a lot, but checking in and having regular conversations about some of these things, using some of the tools of description, non-judgmental, checking the facts. We're going to talk about some of these strategies right now, straight from DBT. So dialectical behavioral therapy includes so many things that has impacted a young person's ability to thrive. One of them, we talk about 4 different modules, and they all connect with the ability for a young person to, at the same time, accept hard things and employ change strategies. So both of those things at the same time. And what we know about the concept of emotion regulation is that the amygdala, which is the kind of old, we talk about with the brain hand model, that the amygdala is the thumb, and it's the oldest part of our brain that is attached to your emotion and your stress. And just even 8 weeks of emotion regulation and distress tolerance using mindfulness skills shows less activation in the amygdala. And the thing about having some mindfulness practices in your life is really about, hey, we're here right now. Let's try not to judge the situation that we're in. And at the same time, try to employ a strategy to reach our goals. We also know that if you have a more mindful brain, that it's easier to detach from some of the negative thinking and some of the intense emotions that may appear during difficult times. So we teach the kids that at the same time, you may react to a situation with the emotions, and you may react. A lot of our parents go into the rational mind. Well, just finish your test and you'll feel better tomorrow. Well, what we know is that just addressing the stressor doesn't necessarily address the emotions and the stress cycle underneath. So in session with kids, when they're upset, when they come to us for help after a fight, if they're crying in the bathroom, this is a strategy that Kalee and I use all the time, which is, hey, we want to attend to the emotions and look at what your brain is doing and feeling. But at the same time, we want to be rational and use logic to think about, hey, what's really going on, and how can I use my coping skills or my interpersonal skills to try to solve the problem. Paula, do you want to say anything about how you use this concept in your practice?
Sure. Thank you, Allie. I think this is such a great slide, and there's a really nice visual with like a Venn diagram where the emotion mind and the rational mind overlap, and then there's that key spot in between where they overlap, which is the wise mind. And this again helps normalize and validate for people what they're feeling in kind of a visual way, and to just kind of see that the goal is to move towards that wise mind place when they're making the decisions. Not to judge them if they are all in emotion mind, that's just where they're at, but that it's possible for them to learn how to make movements to a better place. And this concept really seems to resonate, I have found. I don't know if Kalee, you and Allie find that, but this concept of moving to their wise mind, that they can get there even if they're not there, seems to be very comforting for young people, especially when they're going through things.
Yes, and we do a lot of even modeling of thinking strategies. Like the 3 here are things that I sometimes will have students write out on a sticky note or write in their agenda or put into their phone as a reminder. And incorporating wise mind strategies is a really easy coping skill to practice with your whole family. Catching yourself when you were using exaggerated language and storytelling and saying, do I need to check the facts here? So what we talk about for engaging the wise mind is helping, just first name the emotions and remembering to teach or to talk about, hey, emotions have a beginning, middle, and end. we try to avoid the judgment and say, you shouldn't feel that way. Don't feel that way. Stop. And really even check in on how intense the emotions are with the scale. Like how mad are you that this person didn't talk to you at lunch today? And then that's also a clue to see kind of where to go next. One of the most important things that we work on with our students is the next piece, is checking the facts. Because what happens is when your mind is in emotion mind and your physiological stress response is kicked in, we forget about this piece. And we often filter out other pieces of the story. We forget to understand maybe the bigger picture of things. And so that's when a lot of our young people are maybe pressing send on some message, or doing, acting in an impulsive way because they're feeling quite emotional. And so we always want to, check in, use some mindfulness strategies to calm, and then really check the facts without judgment. So that's a piece to actually help bridge from feeling emotional to, okay, well, what do we do? Well, that's where we bring in the positive coping. So different emotions require different kinds of coping skills. Like Kalee said, that, FaceTiming your friend and going on a bike ride are not always possible, but having those positive coping things in your routine is also a nice way to prevent spikes in emotion, and to really help keep an overall healthy person. Again, just to stress that trying to check the facts is not what you want to do when somebody's extremely emotional and dysregulated. First, we want to attend to the emotions and really, nurture and be non-judgmental, give empathy, and not jump right into the solution problem solving mode. Paula, do you have anything to say about this piece?
I just think this is such an important part. Young brains are still developing the frontal lobe, where all the executive functioning also is happening in decision making, and that they're still developing until early 20s, I believe. And so it's just so important to remember that and to bring them back to the fact check. It's just really so helpful. And I just like the way you bridge that gap, Allie, as to, how do we move from that mindful state into the next stage of the coping. And yeah.
We joke in school counseling, we often will see somebody, in a 45-minute session, and it's called brief intervention. And so we sometimes, are, okay, we can attend to the emotions for 5 minutes, and then we've got to kick in with our coping. But if you're a child, and we'll get into this in a little bit, but if your child is having more often the emotional dysregulation and having trouble using coping behaviors and having difficulty communicating about what's going on, we often say, okay, well, let's bring in somebody else to talk to, because the intervention and the help is just more effective the earlier on in a system. So again, we'll say more about that. One thing we use a lot, another really helpful skill, and something that's helpful in the home too, is as opposed to letting the worry mind about the future, this is something we hear all the time, is future worry. We always want to bring the person back into the moment of, okay, well, what can you do right now? And one of those things is figuring out the real steps to managing a future stressor. And again, it's something that can really help once a student gets to that difficult thing. or and instead of kind of avoiding it or just thinking, oh, stop worrying about it, there's ways to really approach it without letting the worry thoughts go too far too far down the road. And then finally, this piece is just so important, this acceptance piece. This is something that comes up every day, in every moment, in every interaction with kids, that while we're also trying to help build action, we talk about well-being not being something that you achieve, but it's an action towards, and it takes work every day. There's also this piece when things are hard, when friendships change, when, tests are difficult, when a teacher is this or that, we also bring in the concept of acceptance, and that really things are going to be difficult. This goes back to the wave metaphor from the beginning, that the waves are going to come and go. And even if something is really difficult or really unfair and we don't agree with it, we want it to be different. Adolescents are really in their developmental stage, just starting to get that, like, it's, justice oriented thinking. Well, it's hard sometimes for them to understand that things just sometimes are what they are, and having that balance of accepting and what can I control at the same time is really clear in students who are having a more easeful time at school and in life. So this is kind of an example that we hear a lot. Okay, the rules are too strict about my phone, about my computer. And the emotional response would be, my parents don't understand me, I have no freedom. And an accepting response would be something like, I have stricter parents, but I'll have more freedom when I get older. So really subtle, trying to help the mind not be too attached to big black and white thoughts or feelings, is a helpful strategy. This is something we gave to the high school students, is this 1, 2, 3 self-check-in day, saying that most of your days are going to be a 2, which means things are just fine. They're not great, they're not terrible. The waves are just, coming and going. And some days are going to be your 1 days where they're wonderful and things are great. And we have kids name what makes a 1 day for you. And then we also say that the 3 day, those grouchy, irritated days when you don't, feel like doing much and you're refusing and you're being grouchy, those are also going to happen. But we are teaching the students that if you're having a lot of 3 days, a lot, well, then it's time to up your positive coping skills, maybe up some mindfulness and exercise, check in on your sleep, but then also maybe that's when you need to think about talking to one of your trusted adults. So really, we say, hey, you guys, having these coping skills, the world around you isn't going to make you feel happy. It is kind of something that you can attend to every day. And this is the key here, that sometimes kids or parents think, well, things are really bad, but it's just going to fizzle out. It's just going to work itself out. I know it's going to go away. Well, what we see typically is that if there's a person who's having trouble with their positive coping skills and is sort of in a negative moment or a stress cycle, that typically things don't necessarily fizzle out on their own. And we really believe that early intervention is so key. This is, Paula, this is, I think, where we're going to transition to really talking more clearly about some of the suicide prevention components.
And Allie, if I could just make one quick comment on what you said before, prevention is even key. And teaching these skills of mindfulness, regulating emotions, tolerating, handling stress, and good social skills are really great for all kids to have as a base, because stress is going to come. And the sooner they learn how to have these skills and an approach, the better off they are to surf that wave. So, yeah.
Yes. Again, oh, please.
I was just going to say, I mean, growing up in a sports world, I often really talk to the kids about how, you know, the next slide talked about well-being is not just a state, that it's constant practice. And like I said, growing up in a sports world, that mindfulness or these coping skills take practice. It's not that I do it once and I check a box. And now it's like, well, now I have well-being, on to the next thing. Or now I'm really good at mindfulness, now on to the next thing. Like Dr. Paula is saying, that this is, you know, it's prevention. You work at it, you practice it. And
Uh-oh. Kalee, I think you're frozen, my dear. Oh, goodness. Is everyone back?
Yes.
I'm not sure what happened.
Well, one of our internets went out. Oh my goodness. Hi, everybody. Let me stop share. Okay, Ms. Whipple, do you want to go back?
So I'm not sure where I cut out, but again, just talking about the practice of, you know, our coping skills and well-being, that it's not just something that's bestowed. We talk about this magic wand, and I wish more than anything I could magic wand and be like, you have well-being and you have well-being. Unfortunately, it doesn't work that way. But again, just practicing it when, you know, when you feel regulated, when you feel good, when you're having a 2-day or a 1-day, that you can still practice these skills, that this is prevention, that it's not just on my 3-day, now I have to try these skills that I only practice once every 5 days or once a month. That oftentimes we have kids being like, well, it doesn't work for me. It doesn't work for me. And we're saying, well, when's the last time you've tried this? And it's like, well, last month when I was feeling bad. And so it's that the key is the prevention piece of saying, hey, we build and we work on these things. And in advisory, you know, we do mindfulness, but we try it for 30 seconds. And we're saying, okay, 30 seconds is really hard for some kids and really easy for others. And we're saying, just breathe for 30 seconds. And then we can work our way up to 1 minute and then work our way up to 2 minutes, you know? And so it's not something that just happens overnight and now all of a sudden I'm really good. But to prevent, we have to keep practicing these skills, even when we're in a regulated state or at our, you know, one magnificent days.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Well said, Ms. Whipple. We do hear that a lot. Oh, mindfulness breathing doesn't work for me. So we try, I mean, we use as many metaphors as we can. You know, what is the first thing that a child does when they're born? Breathe. What does the basketball player do right before the 3-point? Breathe. It really is something that, even if your favorite coping skill is calling your best friend or going to the gym, you can breathe just in through your nose for a few seconds and out slowly anytime. And we do a little math and say that if you try quiet breathing, non-judgmental breathing for 2 minutes a day, just 2 minutes a day, you get something like 8 hours over the course of the year, which we know from the brain scans actually helps your parasympathetic nervous system cope with stressors and ride that wave a little bit easier.
And Ms. Hersh, if I could just say, you know, the Navy SEALs actually practice box breathing, up 4, hold 4, down 4, before they do their special missions in order to get the benefits of the breathing and the mindfulness. So really, really good stuff.
It is some of the military evidence, the research from the military using mindfulness, box breathing, visualization is clear. The last 10 years, just to say, with the advent of the brain scans, has really changed the field for us in treating youth. because we know, well, not just youth, adults as well, we know, we can see that just a little bit of attention in coping and prevention can have huge impact on your relationships, your learning, your focus, your goals. So we're a broken record about this, and but it's not in a bad way. It's really, again, important that we are speaking the same language to our young people and understanding that, hey, this is, even in these tough times, even in the mass world of uncertainty, there's wonderful things that you can do and ways to raise your quality of life. So now, getting to, and I'm looking at the time, we will have time for questions at the end. So thank you so much. And we wish we could be here in person, seeing your faces, and hopefully that will be in the future. And so just getting into some of the suicide prevention content is that, you know, this is hard to talk about. And part of being a young person is wanting to have your individual life and wanting to have your main relationships be with your friends, socially communicating online, and not really kind of doing check-ins with the family about how really you're feeling. You know, we know from youth that, well, 50% of our high schoolers indicated that they feel stressed, which I think is, you know, maybe even lower than I thought. I think you all are doing wonderful jobs at helping them have routines and keep their daily lives as functioning as possible. But again, we hear a lot that, hey, I've been noticing these things, I've been wondering it. Paula mentioned, you know, some of the examples like, oh, I saw these bloody tissues, or I found these razor blades, or I saw these weird text messages, but I just, you know, I wasn't sure what to do. I thought that, you know, it would probably fizzle out or go away. I mean, this is sort of our call to action here, which is that, you know, if it's really hard to talk about this stuff, and if it's hard for you as a family, that's okay. We just are saying, hey, please don't ignore it. Reach out to one of us or a counselor privately, or even the pediatrician. You know, for a lot of families, working with insurance and navigating those hoops of outside care can be tough. Well, pediatricians are also wonderful first steps if there's some behaviors that you're seeing. So we hear a lot, and sort of the old thinking was, oh, we don't want to talk to our child about suicide because we're worried, you know, it might put the idea in their head. And we know from our work and from peer-reviewed research for years that it actually is the opposite, and that checking in and talking about these topics, yes, they're difficult, but no, they're not taboo. And that's why we really look to some of the data and some of the statistics. You know, I have lost students to suicide, and this is a real youth crisis. Looking at some of the data here, suicide is the second leading cause of death for people ages 10 to 34. This was from 2018, this infographic from NAMI. So again, this is real for us in the world. And what we know is that 80% of people who do complete suicide have posted or talked about it and have kind of put it out there, which is pretty high. So what does that mean for us and for you as parents? Again, we talk to the students that it is okay to feel sad and bummed and mad and irritated and not to want to do things and to have those 3 days. But if you're starting to see things happening with more intensity for, you know, 2 weeks or longer, and usually clusters of some of these things, that's when we really say, hey, let's get somebody else involved and start working on evidence-based practices for health and for coping. Again, one of the clues we see a lot is this ruminating thoughts, the big emotional thoughts where you're attached to a story from the past or the future. But again, any one of these things by itself is fine. And even, after a loss or a grief, or for sure, in March and April, there may have been some of this in your students and your family, because it was a real impact, a real big change to their daily life to be going into Zoom life. So these are the things that we, would say, hey, just take a look. And if these are really happening with intensity, start the conversation. Again, I'm sure you all have, many of people have these conversations, but we also hear, I don't know what to say. I said, hey, I asked them, are you okay? Are you fine? And then the student says, I'm fine, and then walks into the other room. So, start the conversation. Hey, I care so much about you, and I know you don't want to talk about this stuff, but I'm noticing some things, and let's have a hard talk right now. Again, these are not easy things to talk about, but they're also too important to ignore. With our older students, they say, oh, Ms. Hersh, what's the line when I should be worried about a friend? And we say the line is when they are talking about hurting themselves or using language of suicidality. That's the line. That's not something for you to have to handle on your own shoulders as a teenager. We talk to them, really, it's just a couple of steps. If somebody is talking about this, your friend, we need you to tell a trusted adult. And that's the Ms. Whipple mentioned that we had the kids name 3 trusted adults in a handout of coping skills, and said, look, this is emergency. This isn't, we want you to have your own life. We want you to thrive with your friends and be able to have fun conversations on your phone that we're not involved in. But if this type of talk accompanied with behavior comes up, it's never something to keep a secret. There's so much to say about this piece, and there might be questions about this as well. But Paula or Kalee, do you want to add anything on the do's or the avoids side?
I agree, Allie, that this can be a difficult realization for a parent if they are seeing some of these things. And I just want to reiterate that the concept of asking the question does not implant the idea in a teenager. And again, taking that non-judgmental stance and just being supportive and descriptive and being a helper is really, what they can do.
I was just going to touch on that as well. I think that we've talked about it now. This is probably the 3rd time of that non-judgmental piece and the validation piece that these kids, wanting, when they're talking about it, feeling very embarrassed, or, not wanting to be a burden to their parents, or not saying, I don't want to make them worry more, or the adults in their life worry more. So they're actually going to friends more than they're going to adults. Mm-hmm. And we talk a lot to the kids about this is not on your shoulders to keep. And that, what you can do, the best thing you can do to be a friend or to help a friend is to tell a trusted adult. Mm-hmm. And then same with parents, of like just the hearing them, non-judgmental, that these feelings and these things, that they're normal, that they're common, that they are not doing something bad or doing something wrong because they have these thoughts. And so staying neutral and being supportive.
Absolutely. And just real quick, a metaphor I often like to use is if your child was having, or if the individual was having trouble with their heart and they needed to see a doctor for their heart, to take medicine for that, or to get help for that? Would you do that? And what about if they had an issue with their thyroid or their pancreas, or they broke their leg? Would you get treatment for that? And similarly, if things are dysregulated in their brain, well, wouldn't you want to get them help for that? And putting it in that way sometimes helps destigmatize things, that this is just another part of our body that might need treatment.
Exactly. Just this first bullet point, hopefully this won't happen in your family, but it might. If your child brings to you information about somebody at school who's posting about self-harm or suicidal ideation, please, you don't have to keep that on your own shoulders either. And again, we urge and ask for you to let us know, to share with the division director and us counselors, because really that is evidence that a young person is struggling and needs a little bit more help, or sometimes it can be, a month or two of working with an outside counselor to get back to neutral. That's the other piece too, is that when somebody is struggling and we make a referral to talk to somebody, it doesn't mean that they have to talk to that person for 5 years, or have 3 times a week therapy for the rest of their life. It really does kind of depend on a whole bunch of systems about the routines, the coping skills, the checking in, the building up the positive behaviors, using concepts like coping ahead and radical acceptance, tapping into that wise mind, and mindfulness. I mean, there's plenty of evidence that shows that having that mindfulness practice allows our brain to not get stuck on some of the negative thinking, which causes the negative emotions, and then you're stuck in the stress cycle. So again, we're saying this to our students is, hey, check in with your adults, check in. And it can be people at home, it can be your coach, it can be your person in your religious community, it can be your school counselor, your advisor. Our students at the Meadows have so much contact with these loving and wonderful teachers and advisors who are so wanting everyone to thrive and to keep functioning as best as possible and to enjoy life. We again, without wanting to be, we don't want to be intrusive into people's lives, but just reminding everyone that suicidality is not something to keep a secret. It's not something to avoid talking about. And it's difficult, but at the same time, very, very helpful. We know that sometimes students feel like, I don't want to be the one. We hear this word all the time. I don't want to be the one to tell or make a big deal. What if I'm making too big deal? And we try to flip that and say, don't you want to be the one to get somebody help? Don't you want to be the one to save a life? And it is true that friends of people who have been suffering have saved their lives by telling an adult when something has been happening. But again, we talk about making sure that you have resources and good boundaries. We could do a whole other talk about interpersonal effectiveness and setting boundaries with friends. And again, these are so important to, well, they're important, so important that the state of Nevada created a law about this piece. But really, truly, it has been a hard year, and we're so lucky to be able to be here at school together, for the most part. And even though there is still uncertainty about everything for the future of our young people, we're just dedicated to making school being the best place possible. So that's where we shall end and look in our Q&A if anybody has any questions. And I don't see any. Wow. Are people?
I don't see any either.
Oh. Wow. I see. Oh, here, I see one. Ah, this is a great question. I'm gonna I'm gonna read it. It says, what are some techniques for getting your child to open up? Paula? I'll talk. I mean, I can start but
Yeah. Honestly, it depends on their age, obviously, where they're at developmentally. But one of the things that I think for younger people is we have found therapeutic games a great tool to be able to get kids to start discussing these kind of things. And just towards that end, I just want to show everybody this game called Resilient Kids Boot Camp. And this is a therapeutic game based on DBT that I developed through a company I have called Psych Whisper. And this game's available on Amazon, but I just like it because it's a tool that school counselors can use. It's a tool that therapists can use in their office to ask questions that are on cards on each of these different topics. And then it can be used in a counseling session, and then families can use it in between to address, as this question asks, how do we start this conversation? So I think it's a great way, in a non-intrusive way, in a fun way. You roll the die, you move around the board to start a discussion about some of these things early, getting to that prevention point. So that is one approach. And then, another approach is I just really think it's okay to just say, hey, how you doing? And setting up a culture in the family where it is okay in a non-judgmental way just to support these discussions. Some families have check-in times daily where they do a 5-minute mental health check-in. How you doing on a scale of 1 to 10? And maybe the child just throws out a number and says, I'm a 7. That's all I'm going to say today. Or I'm a 2. And maybe there's a rule, if you are below a 5, we're going to talk more about that today. So those are just some ideas. Allie and Kalee?
So just to say the name, Paula, can you hold? I have mine is across the room. It's called Resilient Kids Boot
Yes,
Camp.
it's called Resilient Kids Boot Camp. And, I developed this tool because I had taken a year-long training in DBT and wanted to find ways to bring this to younger people. And therapeutic games there are lots of them, in terms of cognitive behavioral tools for ADHD, all kinds of games. But this is really a good way to help build those tools early and get the kids talking. You can do it in a group setting, a family setting. So, but that's just one of many ways. And I know Allie and Kalee are doing tons of those with you at the Meadows.
Well, that's so in incorporating fun, play, games is one of the structured downtime is one of the main, not one of the main, but is a big piece of the advisory programs in the middle school and the high school. Because on one hand, we want to teach students to be able to, talk about things with each other and their teachers and their families openly. But at the same time, just sitting around in a circle and having questions on the slide can be really hard. So we do different kind of communication games. We even will say, hey, go for a walk, get what I would say to a family is get everyone moving, go for a walk, play Connect 4, do some light checking in. We love the not just the scaling 1 to 10, but also, rose and thorn. What was your rose and thorn of the day? Or
like that.
what was, instead of, again, saying, was that person mean to you? Did you have a bad day? Instead of interviewing for pain, we try to kind of do the balance of the positives and the coping as well as the tough stuff. But again, if you were to the question that getting your child to open up to you, I think that also depends on, if you're talking in the teenage years and you're noticing some of the behavior things, and you're noticing the crying and some of the more emotional responses to the world, or they're just in the room and closing their door and not sharing your phone. That's, that's when you may need to do the more, hey, buddy, we're going to have a special lunch on Sunday. You try to kind of make it into an event where you're establishing your closeness, where you're saying how much, I care, being non-judgmental, being nurturing, empathic, normalizing things, really giving that real strong dose of empathy, and then kind of going into is there anything going on? So rather than just kind of just jumping into, hey, open up right now, I need you to talk. You want to you want to try to first attend to the emotions and try to connect to the loving, close relationship. That's the goal. I mean, some of the most beautiful moments we've seen as school counselors are when students and young people and their parents are having a conflict and just say, we want to just be close. We want to be close. And then watching that unfold. Ms. Whipple has to go to advisory to her 7th grade advisory.
Can I touch on that really quick and then I'll head out? I want to talk about when we have these talks, some of the kids are saying, well, the first question that my parents ask, or, the talks that we have when I get home are, how did the test go? Or how was school? Or how did that big project, did you present? How did it go? And it seems that they feel that expectation. Again, we're not saying every kid. I'm saying that some of the what we hear is that the talks are the expectations on the grades. And so keeping those lines of communication open early. And again, it goes back to the well-being that we practice as adults, as well as saying, hey, not just when we notice something's going on with our kid, that we try to then have these difficult conversations. That when we see that our kid is in, again, I keep going back to the check-in days of the 1 days and regulated, that we still have these open lines of communication, that we're digging in deeper than just the academics or just the surface level stuff, that when they're regulated, we're still having difficult conversations. Tell me about your friends. What is it that you value about your friends? What is it that your friendship, diving into some of those topics when we're in a regulated state can help, that when we start to see the escalated emotions, that we already have those lines of communication, that we can make that event and say, hey, what's going on? I've noticed the last couple of days have been, some crying or locking yourself in your room, those type of things, that it doesn't come out of the blue that now all of a sudden my parent wants to talk to me about something, but keeping those prevention and those lines of communication open early.
Great point, Kalee.
Thank you. And again, Paula, so grateful for you. Allie, I will see you soon, but thank you, caregivers, for being here. And I'm sorry you have to leave. Got to get back to the kids.
Take care of the students. There's a great question in here that's for parents, and it's I'll just read it. It says, any tips for parents to keep your cool in a moment? Sometimes it's hard to be non-judgmental when things are tough and emotional, when you're trying to get out the door to school. So great question. Paula, any immediate thoughts?
I would say one of the things is, whenever I work with a family on DBT, I really ask the parents to kind of embrace the approach too, because it's kind of everybody getting on board. And the more that you're able to regulate your own self, which is not easy, it will go a long way in being able to approach it in that non-judgmental, descriptive way that we're talking about. So maybe getting into your own practice of mindfulness and meditation, and taking your mental break when that happens and saying, I'm not going to respond here. I'm just going to observe and let this pass, and then decide how I'm going to approach that. I'm going to just stay in this moment. You utilizing those approaches, I think, is really key.
Mm-hmm. Oh, 100%. I think that and that's partly why we wanted to do this talk with parents today, was because we, first of all, understand that we'll hear sometimes, oh, Ms. Hersh, well, that's great that you say that. That's great that you're telling me I need to go to bed at 10 every night, but I need to get an A on my thing, which means I need to work until 1 a.m. So, it's helpful. We haven't talked about sleep. I would say that's a whole other conversation, but I would say that I'm, pretty open and really can walk in the shoes of a teenager pretty well. It's, I think, part of why I'm in this profession, but their phones and their digital lives are where I get into a pretty hard line. It's really doing some tough stuff with their social skills, with their emotion regulation. And not only that, that's where some of the hardest stuff, content and things that we're seeing comes up. So anyway, back to the question, using your own strategies for mindfulness and for kind of predicting. If the example here is getting out the door to school, if that's like a regular conflict in the family, then you can try the coping ahead strategy and really checking in about the family on a non-rush day and saying, okay, we've got, Tuesday is an important test in 6th grade. So we need to, and really planning each step, as well as, look, it is, nothing's perfect. We're talking about well-being, we're talking about managing emotions, but that's also knowing that things are going to spike. I mean, we are going to have moments where we snap, where we are not using empathy because the moment is tough. But I think, again, the key is really thinking about your own management, as well as kind of problem solving about things that you're noticing in the family that can be tough in the dynamic. If that's helpful. I don't actually see any more questions. And I know it's 9:34. We've recorded this, and please know that you can email me at any time with questions, with scenarios, just to run something by, and really appreciate you all being here, taking the time to be here for this tough topic. Paula's wonderful. If anyone is interested in her as a private practitioner, let me know, or you can, I don't know if you have space in your practice, but really there's no stigma in having your child have a person to talk to. It's really helpful. Times are tough, and I say, let's take the team approach in really helping everyone thrive here. So,
and Allie, I just want to say thank you so much for putting this together, and I applaud you for really just being on the cutting edge of introducing this kind of an evidence-based program and the way you've presented it and are setting up your program. Kudos to you.
Oh, thanks, Paula.
Well,
there was one last question, which I'm happy to stay and address. It's about picking. So the question says, my child picks at their nails when doing homework. I try to teach him to breathe. How can I help take the stress out of it? Yeah, I mean, there are little approaches. I mean, I have so many little things by my desk when I'm working with students. I have stress balls. I have thinking putty. I have a basket of little toys. So really sensory wise and fidgety wise, I would say give lots of options there's little cubes I don't have right here that you can click and move around with your hands, but it does take so much cognitive attention. And it is almost like a physical feat when people are doing homework. And then it completely makes sense that there's a need for some sort of outlet. So you could even do, depending on how amenable they would be to this, I love to use the timer, okay, so you're going to do the timer for 10 minutes or 15 minutes, and then you're going to go jog around the the island in the kitchen, or you're going to go pet the dog for 5 minutes and then come back. But I would say give options for fidget, understand that the physical, that's the stress. When they're picking, that's the stress coming out. And so giving them an outlet for the physical stuff, or breaking the work up into smaller pieces. And anything that you think I missed there, Paula?
I agree, Allie, with what you said. I like the sensory distraction tools, and also the mindfulness kind of plays in here too. Just making the student aware without judging that that's something that you're noticing with their behaviors, and how they can try to have a substitute or an alternate behavior to eliminate that stress, either tactily or in some other fashion. So, yeah.
Yep. Thank you. Just checking again. It looks like some people are heading off. Thanks to all of you. Again, please email, call with questions. We're here for you. And thanks for your time. Take care. All right, Paula, thanks to you. I'll talk to you soon, okay?
Okay, thank you, Allie.
Okay.
Bye now.
Bye.